Grayson Grundhoefer, 365 Sports Football Analyst and more, Bearcast co-host, joins us on the show this afternoon. Grayson, with the staff that Baylor now has, and it's finally all together, and some haven't been around long enough to do too much of the recruiting, but they're doing all of that. Is this staff, in your opinion, about a half a star tick up of who they're going after, or does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think I get what you're saying if you're talking about the guys that they're replacing. I assume that's what you mean.
Yeah.
And if you do mean that, I think that for just kind of looking at the broad picture, right, because I think this recent wave of hiring kind of skews the fact that Baylor also brought in, coaches earlier in the cycle as well, specifically Jake Spavital, who is one that, I think has been a very good hire up to this point. I think ultimately it's going to all come down to what happens on the field for that offense and how quickly the changes are made to go from wide zone to a spread air raid type offense. But I do think there's a lot of reasons for hope there. And I also think there's a lot of reasons for, fans to get very excited. It's much closer to what I think the Baylor fans are used to seeing than what we saw over the past few years. And I think, both offenses can work for a variety of reasons, but I do think when you look at the roster that Baylor has built, I think the offense that Jake Spavital is bringing in is really going to help things there. Now, as far as other hires, I think Keenan Hall has been an absolute home run on the recruiting trail side. That's been an awesome hire, and they've had, kind of a bouncing around type room at the running back coach position. So I think Keenan Hall coming in and really solidifying that, bringing in top recruits, making prospects very interested to attend Baylor, I think is a big deal. And you're seeing that throughout the DFW Metroplex area. He's done a phenomenal job. Now, as far as kind of these most recent hires, it's really tough, right? Because you look and you go, Dennis Johnson, a guy who I think everyone can agree, he seems like a coach that is an absolute rising star, going to have a lot of success in his career. But for whatever reason, the past 2 years, this defensive line has not been to the level that they were in 2021. And it's not exactly all on him by any means, but, and some of it is the talent on the roster. Some of it is some of the older guys not playing to the level that you expected them. But I do think that, this is probably a good thing for both sides as far as Baylor bringing in Enoki Brechterfield and then Dennis Johnson going to the Ravens. I think it gives Baylor a different look. It gives Baylor a guy who is very seasoned and has coached a lot of really, really good defenses and specifically defensive lines. But the biggest thing that I've seen with Brechterfield, just kind of looking through his track record and what he's done, each place he's gone to, he's had an impact very early. You look at Washington last year, not just this year. Last year, they made a big jump from being just terrible up front to being really solid. And then we saw again this year, I mean, their defensive line was good enough for them to make it to a college football playoff, a national championship game. And I know it wasn't all about their defense by any means, but I think you could see them having an impact. You saw their impact in the game against Texas. So I do think he's a very good coach, and he's got history with Dave Aranda during his time at Wisconsin when he was very successful as well. We've seen other hires too. I would call most of the other hires pushes at this point. I think it's hard to really tell, if it's an upgrade, from Coach Cap to Mason Miller, from Christian Robinson and Jamar Chaney. I think those are pretty much a wash. But I think the other ones that I mentioned, I think there's reason to believe that those are upgrades at this time.
Grayson Grundhoefer segment brought to you by Richard Carr, Buick GMC Cadillac, your Baylor Bear hotline right here on 365 Sports.
Grayson, you mentioned something about the offense that Jake Spavital is bringing in and the players that they have. Transfers notwithstanding, because obviously he's going to go out and get guys that fit that offense and can run it better. But where do you think they went awry in getting players that fit the old offense? And now that they're changing it, why the guys that they have will fit the new offense?
So, I think that part of this is, Texas high school football, a lot of the programs in Texas run a spread offense. And, I think an area where Baylor's really struggled, at least in the wide zone scheme, was specifically the wide receiver position and the passing game in general. And that comes down to wide receiver. That also comes down to quarterback play. And both of those things were not up to the level that they needed to be. And I do think in Jeff Grimes' offense, there was a lot more asked of both of those positions. And so therefore it took a lot more time and a lot more seasoning for guys to, I think, really get it and really perform it to the level that it needs to be performed at for it to be extremely effective. And so, you look at the 2021 season and they just ran the ball so well that it kind of overcame some of their deficiencies in the passing game. And they still had, some big passing plays. And a big part of that is, Tyquan Thornton was an older guy. Drew Estrada was an older guy that they had brought in. They had experience at the tight end position. RJ Sneed was an older guy. They just had a bunch of older guys who maybe, maybe they didn't put up huge numbers. Tyquan did, but maybe the other guys didn't put up huge numbers, but they ran the offense at a very high level. Gary Bohannon was able to complete easy throws down the field and just continue to move the chains. But I don't think that kind of offense was something that was going to continue to be as successful as it was that year, just specifically because the defense was so good. So now once the defense wasn't to that level where it's a top 5, top 10 defense, and it's more like, a top 25, and then this year, it bottomed out. But you saw that the offense had to take on more of a load, and I just don't think that offense was conducive for that. And I think we saw it at times last year for sure. And even in 2022, I think, it reared its ugly head at times then too, especially at the end of the year. So I do think this offense is probably easier to learn, easier to grasp, easier to pick up for the offensive line, for the receivers, for the quarterback as well. And I think just for all those reasons, I do have some optimism that they're going to be more explosive in that regard.
Grayson, do you worry about Dave Aranda spreading himself too thin?
I'm not. And Craig, I know you've mentioned this a couple times, and I completely understand, the thought process of, okay, so he's going to be the head coach, basically the defense coordinator, and he's going to coach linebackers. That sounds like a little too much. And maybe I think at some point we're kind of saying it as maybe we're emphasizing too much that, oh yeah, he's going to be with the linebackers the whole time, but then he's also going to be the defense coordinator and then he's going to be the head coach. I think more so it's going to be his fingerprints are going to be all over what the linebackers do, specifically in the off season and leading up to fall camp and during the season. And I do think he's going to have a huge role in that regard, but I don't think this means he's only going to be with the linebackers for the entire time. I really don't see that. I think his emphasis is going to be on the entire defense, but yes, there will be a focus on the linebackers specifically now. As far as the head coaching stuff, I think this is why you bring in a guy like Jake Spavital. This is why you bring in a guy like Jared Anderson. You're bringing in guys who have a lot of experience, whether it's as offensive coordinators or Jake Spavital as a head coach as well. So I think this was an opportunity for Dave to find some guys who he really trusted to go out there and make the offense successful and just allow them to really, excel in that regard and give them a lot on their plate, but also understand that, hey, this is for the betterment of the team. This is what we need to do so that I can come over here, help this defense, focus on what I'm really good at, and then allow these guys to kind of take the reins on the offensive side. And I think because of that, it's going to allow him to not spread himself too thin.
All right, a quick timeline, and then we appreciate your time today, Grayson. Spring drills will start in a couple of weeks. What then can coaches do, or can people or prospects visit during that time? Can you kind of iron that out for me?
Yeah, so there's actually prospects visiting right now. I mean, there's been some prospects already. 2026 quarterback Quinn Murphy, he visited this week. Another quarterback out of El Paso, Jake Fetty, he visited. So guys are visiting, and that's going to continue during spring ball. It's, guys like to come and watch practice and actually see what Baylor's doing, especially with the new offense coordinator in there. They're going to want to see kind of, what the offense looks like. So that's kind of happening during this timeline. You mentioned spring practice starts March 19th. The spring game is April 20th. They'll have visitors all throughout that period, including for the spring game. And then the weekend after the spring game is actually when Baylor's going to have their first official visit of the year. The hope is that that's not a very big one. The hope is that there's just going to be a few guys who can't make it to their summer official visits. They'll have those guys come on that April 26th date, I believe April 27th, something along those lines. They'll be there for that one. So that's kind of the timeline we have right now for the next month and a half. Spring ball starts, the spring game, and then first official visit at the end of April. So things are going to ramp up pretty quickly, and recruiting is going to be very important throughout this entire time period to sell guys kind of on the vision that they're heading towards, and also sell guys on taking an official visit to Baylor as well. That's a big one too.
Thank you, Grayson. Appreciate your time on Fridays around 3:45. Brought to you by Richard Carr Buick GMC Cadillac. When we come back,